on this episode of the Michael Chacho Show.
So, as you can tell from the title, this is not going to be a glowing or raving review about my Americorps program that I was in. So, I've been trying to write this video for like years, it feels like. Because I don't want to bash the program completely. And I don't want to bash the program I was in completely. I want to offer a different perspective from someone who wished that they did it differently, right? There's definitely a lot of reasons I wouldn't have done it. There's definitely more than 5 reasons, but I'm going to narrow it down to these 5. And granted, these 5 reasons, you know, they're not unlike anything you'd find in a regular job, I guess you could say. So I'm going to talk about the 5 reasons I wish I didn't do it, but I also would like to offer my 5 pieces of advice, suggestions, or resolutions to kind of help whoever's watching this choose an Americorps program that's right for you, if it matters. So why don't we just get started already with reason number 1. This is the most important reason, I think. I think this is something that people really don't take into consideration when they sign up for this. I think this is a reason that people just don't realize how serious this is. This is not a job. Like, on any means necessary, this is not a job. This is not a job. I cannot stress that enough. This is basically contracted service work. It's everything like a job. You have to work almost 40 hours or more a week. And sometimes we had to work on weekends. And, you know, there's long hours and early mornings involved, at least with my program. And you still have to fill out a W-2, which is really strange that you're still being taxed, even though this isn't a job. But hey, whatever. The way Americorps works is that you sign up for a term. And there's various lengths of terms. You can either do, I think the shortest was like 2 months and the longest was 10 months. I did a 10 months term, and within that term you have to complete a certain number of hours. You have to complete, for a 10 months term, it was 1,700 hours, and you have to complete those hours no matter what. There's no PTO days like you get at a regular job. If you take a day off, you have to make those hours back. That's actually something they really stressed on our orientation day, was that this was not a job. And they were really strict on changing your language to avoid thinking that it's a job. For instance, instead of the word job, you would call it service work. Instead of working, you were serving. Instead of employee, you were a service member. Instead of a meaningful experience, it was buffoonery. Instead of calling it a resignation, they called it a graduation. So they were really trying to enforce the fact that, you know, this is just not a job. So if it is a job you are looking for, you gotta look somewhere else. You know, get your bootstraps together and go elsewhere. You can literally do anything else for money, and this will not be it. If you really, 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 really want to do it, you have to change your mentality. You know, I was, again, 28 years old at the time, so I've already been through some full-time jobs, so I've already, you know, I guess I've been jaded. So I had to really reset my brain and thinking, all right, instead of 40 hours of work, I'm doing 40 hours of service. And that was really hard for me because 40 hours is 40 hours. I don't want to do 40 hours of anything, really. And then on top of it, without getting PTO days or anything like that, you know, the fact that you're contracted, you're obligated, I should say you're contracted to complete these 1,700 hours no matter what, you know, it felt very, very controlling. And I didn't like that either. If that wasn't enough of a reason to throw out your application, let's move on to reason number 2. Piggybacking from reason number 1, reason number 2, there is no money. Well, I should say, there is not enough money. I can speak from my own experience that this is not a livable wage. You are now making a stipend. And basically how the stipend works is you get paid the same amount every month. For my stipend, I'm looking back on my notes here, I got paid a total of $13,732 over the course of 10 months. So each month I got paid like $1,373.20. If you take that full number, 13,732, and divide it by the 1,700 hours that I committed to serve, that comes down to $8.07 an hour. For about 40 hours of work a week. So I don't know where people can live off of $8.07 an hour. It's definitely not where I'm from. And then, of course, there's the Education Award, which basically acts as a scholarship. So that's really the only monetary value of the program. I received about $5,920 in a scholarship fund, which I can basically use for my current student loans or future education. So my piece of advice for you is to really take a look at your life. Take a look at your lifestyle. Are you ready to live off of $8.07 an hour? Are you ready to budget, you know, for the weekends? Are you ready to budget for food? There were some people who moved out of state to do this program in New Jersey, and it was pretty rough for them. It was hard for them to find an apartment, to get rent, to qualify for rent, especially in New Jersey. It's not impossible, but it was difficult, to say the least. I was living with my parents, so I was lucky to get away with that. But it was still really hard to make ends meet. You know, you have to factor $1,373, and then taxes are still taken out. Buffoonery. Alright, so we talked about how it's not a job and there is no money, so let's move on to reason number 3. This is a commitment, and they stress that a lot. This is not something that you can just try and then just say, okay, you know what, I'm done. I think I tried and I'm just done. Let's just quit now. This is a commitment. Of course, you can make your own choices, and you're not necessarily trapped or anything. But they definitely don't like it when you quit. I remember specifically when I tried to quit, I remember hearing a lot of gaslighting and guilt tripping, really, of like how, you know, you really should honor your commitment. I mean, it's important that you finish this program, but whatever. I remember specifically one of my coworkers even telling me how the director was like, is there anything you can say to Michael to try and get him to stay? Which just proves how desperate they were. But whatever. I feel like the staff managers or whatever, it's like they kind of knew how hard this program was. And they will just tell you anything to just get you to stay. And I also need to emphasize this too. I mentioned this lightly before. This is a commitment, so you have to complete 1,700 hours. If you take a day off, you have to make those hours back. If you get sick, you have to make those hours back. If come hell or high water, you just always have to make those hours back. I didn't think at the time how long 10 months actually was until I was finally contracted into it, and it felt like forever. I got to the point where I was counting down the days to the end of my term because I just didn't want to do this anymore. So I really urge you to look at your life and consider if this is really what you want to do for 10 months. Because I didn't like that. I didn't like that I didn't have a choice. I didn't like that, oh, if I take a day off, I have to make it up again. So I was still like forcing myself to come into work when I didn't want to. And I didn't think that was fair. So my piece of advice for anyone is that you really have to look at your lifestyle and really the type of person you are, I guess. You know, like, I have my boundaries. I don't like it when I don't have a choice like this. And just the idea that, like, I have to keep thinking, like, oh, if I take a day off, I have to make these hours back. Like, you are basically contracted for the next 10 months to complete this program. And I thought at the time, oh, 10 months, that's nothing. I can do that. And I mean, yeah, I did it and then some. But definitely wasn't fun all the time. The advice I would have given myself is asking myself, like, all right, this is 1,700 hours. This is 10 months of my life. Am I willing to sacrifice that? Am I willing to do that for this opportunity, for this program? I would also really advise you to ask these really specific questions in your interview. I mean, I dare you to challenge your interviewer and your bosses. You know, ask them, who finished the program? How many people have finished the program? What would the last person who finished the program say their experience was? Ask them if anyone has quit the program and ask them why. You know, obviously in any interview, they're not going to tell you the truth or whatever, but you can see from their physical reaction what type of answer they're trying to give you. So be a spy and look for that look for those clues. So you can definitely find some certain clues if this is going to be good for you or not. Alright, so moving on to reason number 4. I'm not sure if this is consistent with every Americorps program, but it was definitely a running theme with the program that I was in. The management team was very disorganized and at some points hard to trust even. I mean, this is another glimpse into the nonprofit world, I guess. It was always unpredictable. It was consistently unpredictable. I feel like there was always like last minute emergencies because of whatever, last minute deliveries of certain things or last minute projects that needed to get finished. And I'm not sure what causes it that. Maybe it was the people. Maybe it was the people on the top, I guess. You know, certain people can't make decisions without approval of someone else, and that's very common in the nonprofit world, I guess, is that we can't do certain things unless we have the permission from the higher-ups, so to speak. And especially in the nonprofit world, there's a lack of resources. So we're always trying to stretch ourselves thin, and granted, I mean, all of us were stretched thin, including management, so I don't think that they were truly just trying to be difficult. I think this is just the nature of the nonprofit world, I guess. I will say during my time in Americorps, it was very apparent that the previous members before me had a hard time with management as well, so I think that kind of just trickled down, so to speak. And we were also working in home rebuilding, so there were certain things that were kind of dangerous that we were put into, which again, we're not employees, we're service members who are being trained on the job to handle these dangerous circumstances. Like, there were times where we had to deal with asbestos. There were times we had to deal with lead. The fact of the matter is like, that could have been avoided, and honestly, it should have been avoided. I think overall, if I can... My one huge issue with the management team that I had was just a lack of transparency. I felt like they had all these expectations and they had all these demands of like, oh, you have to honor your commitment. And it just came off like hypocrisy to me, especially when they weren't being transparent. It's like they knew that this was a horrible circumstance and they still put us in those circumstances. And I didn't like that. I also think a lot of it is due to just lack of professional people who want to do this type of work. Like maybe they didn't have like the technical skills and ability to do this type of work, or I'm not sure. I just don't think that most of them are qualified. I think looking back on it, my advice to anyone and my advice to myself would have been, you know, asking them those serious questions again. You know, how do you stay organized? Do you guys always make last minute changes? How many meetings do you guys have? I would also ask them, how are we trained in this? You know, I had no experience in home rebuilding before this, and I don't think I want to go back to it ever again. But I had zero experience in home rebuilding, and I feel like the way I was trained could have been done better. I would also ask them specifically, how are we trained and who are we trained by? I feel like a lot of times we were trained peer to peer. So like, you know, the previous members before me were training the new members, which, you know, is good in some ways, but there was never a standard, I feel like. So I think being trained in a systematic and standardized way would have been a lot better than just like flying by the seat of our pants, so to speak, and just making things up as we go. It definitely would have made us feel more confident, I guess. I just feel like, how can I trust these managers if they're not even the ones training me? Alright, so now we've made it to my fifth and final reason. Reason number 5. These were the most difficult coworkers I've ever had to work with. And I've been through a lot of jobs, and I've worked with a lot of different teams. This by far was the most difficult, in my opinion. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still friends with some of them, and, you know, we laugh about it now, but I feel like working together in that environment was just incredibly annoying. And I don't believe that these people were difficult by nature. I think that they were difficult because of these circumstances, you know, because we had a terrible management team that didn't set a standard or any discipline, because we're stressed out because we have to honor our commitment and there's no money, and, you know, we're trying to make ends meet in our own personal lives. This is like a recipe for a human resources disaster. Quite frankly, I think that this should be a case study for any human resources organization when you pin people in this type of environment. You know, now people are training themselves and they're developing this ego, and then you're hearing things like, oh, that's not my job, or like, oh, I don't want to do that, like, oh, I don't want to do that. You know, I mean, I was one of them at the time. Like, there were certain things I didn't want to do, and there were certain things that I had reached my limit, especially with these circumstances. In Americorps, you're probably also going to work with people from different backgrounds and different work experiences or lack thereof. I've worked with people with all types of ages and all types of educational backgrounds. I've worked with people who this was their first job. I've worked with some mature coworkers who this was something they were doing in their retirement. I was working with people like myself who were just trying something new. I was also working with people who wanted to make this their career. Like, they were non-profit all the way. They were like this bleeding heart good Samaritans who had a real passion for it. And I think when you have all those types of emotions, it definitely creates a really hard team to work with. along with the other circumstances that we're in. So my advice to myself or to anyone watching this is, again, it comes down to that interview process. You know, try to talk with people in the program if you can. Try to, like, I don't know, after your interview, try to scope around to see if there's any AmeriCorps members you want to talk to. I would try to ask my interviewer, you know, what's the team environment like? I would try to ask them, you know, what's the standard and how you're being trained and what are you graded on in the process? Because honestly, there was no organization, so it was kind of like everyone was doing their own thing at times. I would even be as bold to ask them, like, does this team get along with each other? And again, in interviews, people are gonna lie, so try to watch for their body movement, try to watch for their reaction. Are they shifting in their chair? I would try to ask them, how do they resolve conflict amongst teams? And again, you may not get, you know, a truthful answer, but you can see in their reaction what type of answer they're trying to give you, and that should be enough. Whew. Alright, well, that was cathartic. I feel lighter now. I feel like I've purged all my emotions out. You know, joining Americorps, it's not for everyone, but if you choose to do it, I definitely think you need to look inside yourself and see if this is something you really want to do. I would also make sure to properly scout the programs you're looking for. There are so many kinds of programs and so many different teams that can offer you something more and something better for you. I think ultimately for me, it just wasn't a fit, and I stayed because I couldn't find anything else, and in some ways I kind of resent it. But at the end of the day, I learned something and I can only move forward. So thanks for watching the Michael Chacho Show, and I'll see you on the next one.